Welcome to a special edition of the Cinelux podcast. My name is Hakeem Lashnani. Today we're talking about police brutality in America in the wake of the George Floyd murder. In part one, we'll be talking about the problems of police brutality and how they manifest. In part two, we'll be talking about reactions and responses to the George Floyd murder. And in part three, we'll be discussing possible solutions to the police brutality problem. Check the timestamps in the description below to skip the introductions or to skip to any other part of the podcast.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a special edition of the Cinelux podcast. I'm Hakeem Lashnani. We're going to be talking about police brutality today. It's a very contentious topic these days. What with the George Floyd murder happening less than 1 month ago, and various other instances of police brutality within the past many decades and days and weeks leading up to today. We've got some guests on today who will introduce themselves in a minute. I just want to give you guys a general overview of the structure today. We're going to introduce everybody, and then we're going to talk about the problem of police brutality, how it originated, historical aspects, different parts of the problem, from racial profiling to use of force. Then we're going to talk about the current protests and the responses by various organizations, legal organizations, state and federal governments. Then we're going to talk at length about possible solutions to the problem. We're going to try and limit our discussion of solutions to things that are perhaps a bit more achievable. So abolishing the police is not a realistic solution in today's political climate, but anything short of that is up for discussion. So with that out of the way, I think we'll start the intros.
So first then.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. My name is Isaac. I'm currently the College Republicans president of UMBC. So my political leanings are pretty centrist. I guess that's it for me.
Yep. I'm Tramel. Call me Trey for short. I'm also pretty centrist. I'm also pretty centrist and just more or less a concerned citizen. That's it.
My name is Tyler. Just a software engineer. I guess I would be centrist as well. I don't really lean either way.
You like chilling by the fence, huh?
All of us are about to have no opinions at all. We're just going to be like playing.
No, I have opinions. I just feel like choosing a team is kind of dumb. You have things that you believe in, and you shouldn't have to pick one team.
It's all Demo Crips and we're bloodlicans up here, man. It's hilarious.
I think if you really assess it,
can we finish introductions first?
Okay. Picking a team is whack.
Hello, my name is Yvonne. I'm not exactly centrist. I don't know what I am, but I'm not centrist.
All right.
Oh, should I go next?
Nah.
No.
Yeah.
I'm confused.
Go.
All right. My name is Coconut, and I guess I lean more towards the right, not far. Pretty I can say I'm centrist as well, but with more right-leaning tendencies, depending on the issue anyway. I guess some issues I am left, but there are more issues that I would be towards the right.
We additionally have Rachel, whose mic is probably not working.
Here?
Yeah. She's here.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm Rachel. I'm David's friend. I'm kind of just tuning in. just to get like a different perspective.
All good. I probably should have mentioned this before we started, but there is no obligation for anybody to speak. If you simply wish to listen, that's completely fine. All right, you don't have to speak if you don't want to.
Okay.
I believe that's it, right? Everybody's gone?
Gloria?
All
We
right.
have one more person if she wants
Gloria.
to introduce herself.
Who? Oh. Hello, Gloria. Would you like
Hi.
to give us your introduction?
Wait, could you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay, so like, what does an introduction encompass? Because I don't know what. Hey, I'm Gloria. Sorry.
It's
It
as
could be
short
as
and
little
simple
as
as
your
fine.
name, or it could be as little as your name, or as long as your life story you pick.
No.
Maybe
I
political,
was gonna say, I was gonna be like, okay, life story.
maybe political affiliation or something.
You don't need to if you don't want to.
To be honest,
What's your favorite fruit?
My favorite fruit. Oh, thanks so much for asking. Yeah, so I like oranges and strawberries and pineapples.
You asked for
Pineapple
one
is
thing.
grapefruit.
Hold on.
Do you
y'all-
like grapefruit?
Oh no.
So here's the thing about grapefruit. It's like a love-hate relationship. You get what I'm saying? So like, it really depends.
Mhm.
It
You
should only
guys,
be a hate
you guys
relationship.
noticed how I asked for favorite fruit, and I got 3 that weren't even the actual
Oh,
best
I need you
fruit,
to
which is mango.
Vaughn,
How dare you
Yeah,
say
you
man?
have to understand.
Sometimes
You
you
have to
forget about
understand.
mangoes.
Like, you can't make me choose.
let's get to the actual topic before I fight all you on mangoes. Oh, I can't. Oh my god. All right, we'll leave mangoes for another discussion.
Cool.
Wait, did you finish your introduction? I'm sorry. I know your name is
Um,
Gloria. You got that out.
Okay.
Was
Yes.
there anything else you felt you wanted to let people know before we start?
I'm passionate, but I also like to learn. So cool. That would be very important for the conversation that we have.
You're a passionate learner.
Oh.
That's good to know.
Boom. There we go. Can proceed. That's my introduction.
So again, the way this is going to be split is in 3 really, really broad topics. The first one is the actual problem of police brutality. The second one is the current protests and responses, and the third one is possible solutions. Within each of the 3 broad categories, we'll let the discussion flow as organically as possible. So if there's anyone who has a particular opinion or vast degree of knowledge on the historical problem of police brutality and wants to start the discussion that way, I think that'd be a good place to go ahead. And that's not going to be me. I don't know.
Screaming.
This man said not it.
This man literally said, if someone here is smart enough to speak on this, because I think it would be a good idea, go ahead. But it's not me, though.
That's what I heard.
I mean, it's obvious none of us are experts at this topic. We're all learners, just like Gloria mentioned. I guess to start off, some things that I've been seeing online is that like a precursor to American policing were the slave capturers, where they would like round up runaway slaves, were the original policing system. Also know that like policing has been in every culture, has developed into a civilization. There's always some sort of laws and some sort of arbiters of that law. Yeah.
The point on American policing being founded on the slave patrols, I was thinking we were probably going to get to that later. I was expecting it to pop up this early, but that point isn't exactly. It's kind of like a half truth, right? Because the history of the policing in America, it's like depending on where you were, it was drastically different, right? So the policing that you had in the North was not the same as you had in the South. In the South, that's where the slave patrols came from. So that was an extension of, I believe they were called the Slave Acts, and then those gave way to the Slave Patrol Act, and then that gave way to the slave patrols. The first one, I believe, was 1704, if I'm remembering the date correctly, in South Carolina. But that was in the South. In the North, policing really started with night watches in Boston, I think, in the 1630s. There's some contention whether it's like 1631 all the way up to like 1636, somewhere within that range. But in the North, that's where it started. And in terms of the purpose of these different police units in the South, yes, it was primarily for catching slaves. That's what the slave patrols really were. And I guess you could argue, and this is why I say it's a half truth, because they were sort of the first policing group that we had in the country, yes, especially in terms of their organization. But the system of policing that we have right now is more so born of the Northern system, which post-Civil War unified and created what's really, I would say, and again, I'm no expert, but even experts disagree on this, but that unification of the Northern police forces is what really gave birth to the police system we have right now. So while it is true, right, that a part of what we see now in terms of the organization is from the slave patrols, to say that policing is founded strictly on an entity that was created just for the purpose of catching slaves is not completely true. I think that's important to get out, because it makes a difference between looking at a system that was created for the purpose of catching black people versus a system that borrowed from just the organization of that system. You could argue that the distinction isn't that great, but it is a distinction nonetheless. And I think it's one that's important enough that we should point it out.
In the end, I'd also like to add that even so, like playing devil's advocate, theoretically, if modern day policing was solely based on slave patrols, it still wouldn't be a very solid argument, because there are multiple large companies, corporations, products originally started as something either completely different or even problematic. Like Adidas comes to mind with like their ties to German manufacturing for the Nazis and stuff. I'm not going to get into that, but the point is, like, companies, groups, organizations can definitely evolve from wherever they first started, especially if it was hundreds of years in the past.
I think that if you go to the unification that you were talking about, Yvonne, if it was truly a sort of symbiotic unification, then you would imagine that the resultant police that we had today, or at least at the end of the Civil War, would have had elements of both of the previous police systems. And I think that if that was the case, then there would be some left lingering elements of the slave patrols that would have made it into that policing system. Not saying that that's all that policing system was doing, but what I do think it may have been a huge detriment to that is this idea that during the slave patrols, you had runaway slaves who were criminals, and then you had the patrolmen who today we would call cops, essentially men of the law. And that duality that exists purely on a legal basis without looking at morality can be problematic, because if you just say, okay, anyone who disobeys the law is a criminal, and you never seek to examine how morally just that law is that's making them a criminal, then you can get to that point where you're having slave patrols and whatnot. And I think that is one of the elements that survive till today. When you read statistics that are published by the police in order to defend sort of arrests that they make, they talk about criminals as if some guy who's buying weed is the same as a murderer, and that in the face of the law, it doesn't matter how morally right or wrong someone is. Anyone who commits a crime is a criminal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
Yeah, I just also wanted to like say that it's probably quite obvious, and we all probably agree that even after slave patrols and past the Civil War, the Jim Crow South policing system was still obviously a really bad precursor to modern day policing, because of course, again, not all laws are just. And I think we can all agree that Jim Crow laws were completely unjust and unfounded. And shout out to the 1960s, but like policing has definitely had its downs, especially in the past.
So, to me personally, the way I like assess this is that like the police are a way of protecting property, right? And in the South, where slavery was legal, the police were protecting property by administrating working to capture runaway slaves. So this just seems like a sort of to add on to Akeem's point. It's like they're sort of just following the law, and we sort of just have to assess the laws more. And also, in the case of like the foundations of policing, we have to just assess the laws more than, because we're looking at the system, not the people administrating the law. That makes sense.
If we're looking at the laws, I think one of the biggest telling things is I'm not sure which court it was, but the ruling they came up with was that cops don't owe you any specific duty to provide like a policing service to you based on a public duty doctrine or whatever. So essentially saying the common, like, I guess it's a common misconception, although you'd think it wouldn't be, but the idea that cops are there to protect you or serve you regardless of whether or not you call them is not entirely true. And the fact that that's actually what the law says is baffling, to be honest.
Also, we have to take into account that the police are funded by taxpayers, and so although that law says the police doesn't have to, I feel like as taxpayers we have the right to like basically control how our police, if that makes sense. So, and this runs into the whole like broader issues of police unions being like abusing their power in some sort of sense, where they basically have this weird negative feedback loop with politicians, where it's like positive feedback loop politician, where it's like if you don't fund us properly or to the utmost so we can buy these ridiculous level of militarized gear, then we won't protect your system, which will make you look bad and then get you out of place. So
I get what you're saying. I feel like a lot of politics is like that. Like there's problems with special interest groups, just like policing unions and super PACs and all of that jazz. I definitely see that there could be sort of a feedback mechanism where politicians heavily depend on numbers like safety and things that I guess juice up their campaign, and they could say, "Oh, our neighborhood's been safer," and that could have been due to an unjust increase of policing.
I think the main thing we have to look at right now with like reforming the police is looking at the actual police union and the politician counterplay and how that works, and that'll actually lead us to a productive environment in terms of making police actually work for the people and not be like malicious as they are seen now.
Certainly one of the... Sorry, go ahead. Finish.
No, I was going to go into something deeper, so I want you to go first.
I was going to say that I was going to sort of not shift, but say that this relates to police accountability and the lack thereof today, I believe, where a lot of times the only accountability that police have is if there's a video of something, and if people sort of get up in arms and protest about it, and then something actually happens. And going off of what Tramil was saying, a lot of that has to do with the strength of the union, and it's not just police union. There are teachers unions that protect terrible public school teachers, and there's all sorts of public unions that in my opinion have way too much power. But the police union is specifically problematic because you'll have instances where one cop commits a violent act against an unarmed, defenseless civilian who didn't provoke them, and that cop will write a report which falsely claimed that there was a provocation, and that cop's partner or other police officers who witnessed the incident will not condemn the report. They will not deny the facts in the report. They will just sit idly by and act like nothing happened. And I think that, and the union itself will always act like nothing happened. And I think that part of the solution is to get better accountability from the union. As Tramil said, at the end of the day, it's taxpayer dollars that are paying for these police officers. So there's always the option of simply reducing the police budget, and a lot of cities are doing that now, which I think is generally a good idea. But if you sort of can control the union and you can put enough pressure to get the cops to self-regulate, then that could yield positive results.
I just wanted to mention, also going off of both what Tramil and Hakeem said, I feel like I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here because I don't disagree with you guys. But at the very same time, I feel like those sort of ideas wouldn't solve issues related to police brutality that are the reason why we're together and talking like this, like the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of names. And some of the issues with police unions and the connections to politicians don't usually directly lead to changes in individual action. Because with our policing system, there's lots of ideas, like defund the police, then counter examples, well, how are the police going to afford body cameras and save all of that footage? Because security footage takes data, space. That's why most security footage from stores are like potato quality. GoPros are not very cheap. Secondly, taking away guns from police. Well, there are 300 million-ish guns in circulation in the United States. In other countries where guns are not prevalent amongst the civilian population, then of course, the police don't need guns either. If the police don't have guns and criminals have guns, then there's obviously a really bad power dynamic there. Of course, I do agree with you guys that the unions are a big issue too, because it's very frustrating to see a cop committing terrible acts and then getting placed on paid leave or in his retirement earlier pension funds. It's definitely frustrating to everyone to see, and that's definitely something that you could change immediately by breaking apart the power of the union with police. Any other thoughts from anyone?
I just want to say, valid rebuttals to the idea of defunding the police and whatnot, but I think we're shifting a bit too quickly into the solutions portion of the topic. Right, so I just want to say we should dial it back probably. It seems, so far, at least from my observation, it seems we're talking about a lot of things that aren't necessarily police brutality. Like, they wouldn't fall into the brutality thing. So I think maybe we can kind of broaden the scope, and instead of focusing strictly on police brutality, maybe it would be easier if for this opening segment we focus on, just in general, some of the grievances that we have with the current form of policing in the country, what it is that's getting people riled up, and what are the problems that have been building up to the point where George Floyd's killing was basically the straw that broke the camel's back.
For me, I think it's deeper than the cops. I think it's more about the image of Black people in this country and throughout the rest of the world, how we're viewed by other people. Just how the cops approach us is different, or we perceive that it's different from how they approach other races. And I think that's a problem that's a lot deeper than just police brutality.
That's partly precisely why I think. I mean, police brutality is definitely something we can talk about, but from what I'm hearing so far, I think it would be better off if we open it up to more than just police brutality, because there's definitely a lot that goes into why people are so mad with the policing in the country right now.
I'm going from the completely broad topic of tribalism down to like African American racial dynamics in the United States. I wanted to mention off of what Tyler said. Like, personally, I'm an Ethiopian American born here. My parents were immigrants, and I haven't really had any interactions with the police. But even before I've had the opportunity to learn for myself, I was taught my family to fear the police, to act a certain way, certain things that I could do to keep myself safe. Like, these thoughts and ideas were instilled in my brother and I way before we even have to worry about dealing with police. Since we were kids, we were taught how to act around police, how to behave when a police officer is talking to you, what to do when you get pulled over. Like, the fact that it has to be an issue where we're taught for our own safety, regardless of whether or not that safety is effective or necessary. Just the fact that it needs to be taught is already powerful enough.
I completely agree with you, man. I was taught the same thing. Not to wear my hair a certain way, not to dress a certain way. If you're ever pulled over, to always be respectful, have your hands in a certain spot, speak to the cops a certain way. And just the fact that you have to go through that and you don't look at the police as people who protect you, but as a threat, there's something there. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that about the Black experience. And that's where a lot of this racism that we're seeing online comes from, just this ignorance of not understanding what we have to go through from the day to day.
I also think that where some people sometimes what's and this is especially annoying to me because I feel like I consider myself to be on the right-leaning side of the aisle, but sometimes I see people on the right doing this, and it bothers me when they use statistical arguments to try and debunk experiences that are actually lived by people. In the sense that, as you were saying, it's much more insidious than saying, "Oh yeah, but but Black people are not actually stopped by the police more," or something like that. I mean, I don't know what the actual statistics are, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of Black people go out of their way to avoid the police, to be non-aggressive to the police, to be respectful even when the police aren't respectful to them, to be in situations where the police officer will, to avoid escalating a situation with a police officer, even when you'll see videos where a white person does something similar. As the white person escalates the situation and the police officer doesn't react the way they'd react if you did it. So I think that a lot of times it's not just like a problem that can be boiled down to statistics, looking at like how many people got arrested or how many people got shot, because there's already a lot of precautions that are taken by the majority of Black people to avoid getting into altercations with the police, and despite those precautions, these altercations still happen and still end up violent.
The idea that the statistics are on their side, I mean, even if you don't want to believe personal accounts, I mean, the data is still there. Like let's looking at just DC, for example. And I'm not sure, I think this was this year actually, by the ACLU. It's like, if you're Black driving around in DC, you're about 410% more likely to be stopped by a cop than if you were white. Right? And this data doesn't just stop at ACLU research or just simple traffic stops. I mean, an investigation of the Ferguson Police Department, I believe this was back in 2012. I think the study lasted 2 or 3 years. Right, so if you're Black, right, which I think it was like the black population there was like 85% or so, but 90% of citations, 90% of arrests, no, it's 85% of vehicle stops. So 85% of vehicle stops, 90% of citations, 90% of arrests, or disproportionately affecting the black population, which I think is somewhere around 60, in the 64 to 67 range. I'd have to go check that. Right. So it's like, and we could just keep pulling these numbers out. Right. So it's like, it's not that people are simply saying this stuff is happening because it's like a one-off thing where they got stopped and they feel it's unfair. Like, no, it's throughout the country. There is research and there is this data that shows that disproportionately, if you are black, you are more likely to get stopped, even if it's for no reason, by a cop than if you're white. And obviously, this isn't, black people are generally the ones affected the most by it, but it doesn't stop at just black people, whether you be Latino, in some cases even Asian. Like point being, if you're not white, you're generally automatically more likely to be stopped by a cop.
One thing I wanted to go first, Tramo.
Just systematic. I was just gonna add to your point. Look at like laws like stop and frisk, where it's like, hey, you look suspect. I can stop and frisk you just to make sure you're not doing anything bad. Which, like, realistically, if let's say I'm walking around with like a gram of weed, right, and I quote unquote look suspect, and I get stopped and frisked, I'm going to jail for that. And then it's like stuff like that was allowed to slide for a long time, and it seems like every poor community has one of these weird laws. Like I know in like I think it was some southern state, like either Louisiana or Memphis or something, where it's like police would give you $50 tickets for jaywalking, but it's a poor neighborhood, so the $50 ticket would snowball into like something bigger, where it's like you're not actually improving the lives of anyone, which you should be doing. You're actually just making everyone's life harder, which is sort of a tragedy.
Yeah, like, go ahead, you go.
Good. I'm done.
Like going on what Yvonne said, firstly, I wanted to mention that it's really difficult to use statistics in sociological situations because, unlike a laboratory, it's very hard to control all variables, whether or not they're useless or confounding. And studies are usually made to take general correlations and then make conclusions off of that, early cause and effect. But that's a useless point. The reason why I mainly said it is because playing devil's advocate, I could see an opponent saying, oh, well, African Americans this percentage more of crime, so correlations are founded that way. That brings more importance to the point where anecdotal evidence and experiences actually help paint a better picture when it comes to issues like police brutality. And going into the much broader and controversial topic of white privilege, it's a buzzword that everyone likes to hate or use, but it comes specifically to policing, just from I guess the experiences of the masses, like just using simply how we're taught to handle ourselves around police is already disadvantage on its own. Like our baseline is already fear. When it comes to socioeconomic status, like, of course, that's a whole different topic. But I also wanted to add that at least when it doesn't come to policing, socioeconomic status is probably a much bigger factor than anything else. Specifically, when it comes to policing, race is probably one of the most important factors from what we can observe. And that's why, like, specifically the topic of police brutality and dealing with police is quintessential to the Black experience.
So allow me to disagree with you in that saying, so when you say, I think it's more of a classism thing than anything. It just happens to be that Black people tend to be on the poorer side, and police, I think, still represent this the same idea of protecting property, and it just happens to be that poorer people don't have property, so you end up leading this cause where it's like, also you have the confounding effect where if you have no money, it's hard to actually petition for change.
I get what you're saying. Not only is it hard to petition for change, it's also hard to, let's say, hire a lawyer or get legal counsel or bail, or a lot of it is socioeconomic and not specific to race. You go first.
I'm gonna disagree with both you guys and say that agree with you mostly, Isaac, actually, that when it comes to the policing issue, I think it is way more a racial thing than a class thing. And I'll give you a specific example, because at least me, I guess I'm technically half black, half Arab, but I definitely look a lot more Arab than anything else. And usually I don't really feel the police sort of oppression that much, certainly not as much as some people who are darker. But for example, when I go to the airport, I feel it more than pretty much everyone else, because in that circumstance, everyone who looks even remotely Arab is getting stopped and frisked all the time, right? So I know that's just one area, but I'm using that to say that generally the way the police profile people, I think, is purely based off of race and the circumstances in which they are, like the neighborhood in which you are, what the specific quote unquote problems are with that neighborhood, be it prostitution or drug issues or whatever. So for example, if you go into a neighborhood that's, let's say, lower income, there's a bad prostitution problem, if prostitution is even a problem, which is not a discussion I think we're going to have. But if there's a lot of prostitution, the police are more likely to profile women who are dressed in really sort of revealing clothing there than they are to profile women who are dressed in revealing clothing, let's say, in the clubbing district in Santa Monica. You know what I mean? But well, over there it's affluent. There's huge nightlife. So when women are dressed like that over there, the police just assume, okay, that's just what's going on. Be they white or black, I think. But so just really quickly. So I think that, yeah, to some degree it has to do with class, but on the other hand, it's more of it is really tied to race, and racial profiling based off of the environment in which people are in.
So wait, hold on. I wanted to quickly, directly related to that. So would you then say that it's more so a thing of racism or a thing of prejudice? Because I think, although similar, the two are they're not the same thing. And the cases you're describing, I would say, like, if it's a cop that's been in the same area for a long time, end of the day, we're all human, and I think it's very likely, although again, this is where training would come in, where you kind of try to get them away from that line of thinking. But I think it would only be natural for them to develop a certain way of thinking where they make associations where it's like, okay, well, in any given year, usually the people I have to arrest or stop for whatever reason either act this particular way or wearing this particular color, which is some association to whatever it may be, etc., etc. So do you think it's just a case of like a prejudice born from a bias that's a result of their being on the force for however long they may have been there, where to their brain it's like...
Let me interject. Okay, go ahead, Tremont.
Let me interject in the defense of Ivan.
Wait, hold on. Because again, right, it's like if you come in and you're completely fine, but for 5 years, every time you make an arrest or whatever, the person fits a particular profile. There may be some deviation, but for the most part, you can put them all in the same box. I think it's fair to say, and again, I'm not saying that, we should expect our cops to behave this way, but I think it's fair to say that after a certain point, you would just develop that natural bias where your brain just registered people who either look or act a certain way of who you're used to arresting, and if you see someone that fits the profile, you're going to act on it, even though you necessarily shouldn't. I think it's just a natural reaction. So what I'm trying to get at is, for you, do you see it as something where it's prejudice born, again, of a bias that they developed while working? Or do you think it's a case of they came in and they were just racist from the get-go, or whatever it may be, and that's what's pushing them to make these particular arrests or whatnot?
I think for the individuals, it's more how you describe it, in the sense that they see over time the race and gender of the people they keep arresting, and then that's how they develop these biases. However, for the system, that's not the case, and this is what I mean. In the sense that, let's say you're a cop and you're looking at burglary, right? You're looking at people who steal other people's property. That's what you're trying to stop, right? In theory. So you keep getting calls about burglary and you keep arresting these people, and like, let's say 80% of them are black. You might develop that bias in your mind that, okay, people who steal money tend to be black. However, that whatever that may be, right? There's a huge amount of white collar thievery that goes completely unpunished and ignored. And that's that pre-built bias that we're talking about, right? So it's like those 4 Republican senators, including Richard Burr, who dumped stock before COVID hit without warning anybody, and voting against measures that would help prevent COVID, right? They're essentially stealing from the American people. But the cops aren't looking there; they're looking somewhere else. So it's as if you see this plant that keeps coming up in your garden, right? You have a little garden, and every year at the same time of year, this plant comes up, and you look at it and you're like, okay, I'm always expecting this plant to come up. But on the neighbor's garden, the same thing is happening, and you're just ignoring it, and you're saying, okay, look, I'm stopping the plant from coming up, I'm stopping all this crime. But there's this whole other batch of crime that you're ignoring. And I think that ignorance comes more from the system than from individual cops. An individual cop is not going to step into Senator Richard Burr's office and arrest him. But the system should be designed in such a way that he should be in jail and not walk in the Capitol tomorrow morning or Monday morning.
I just wanted to also quickly re-answer Yvonne's question. I'm pretty sure there are individual cases of people with malicious intent coming into the police force in order to exert some sort of power or project some sort of insecurity. I feel like a vast majority is prejudice that's either learned, maybe even taught through insufficient training or something. But with policing, it doesn't just stop there. I'm wanting to bring in the issue of class. I think it's we're under no disagreement that African Americans are statistically more likely to be poorer than many other ethnic groups in the United States. And a lot of crimes are motivated by a lack of wealth, a lack of property. Things like burglary, things like selling drugs, and not even going into the whole issue with the war on drugs in general. Stop and frisk is solely to acquire drugs from users, and usually really sucks at capturing sellers, which is what most people have the problem with. But yeah, it goes into being able to post bail, being able to afford legal counsel. And once African Americans are arrested, it doesn't just stop there. It becomes a whole issue with in general being stuck in the prison system. Sometimes in the most extreme cases in large cities, staying in jail for over a year awaiting your trial because you couldn't afford bail. That doesn't really happen anymore, but that did happen just a decade ago in large amounts in certain areas in New York and California. So, I mean, yeah, it's class does matter. A rich African American might be profiled and arrested, but probably would easily find his way out with legal counsel. At the same time, it's sometimes very wealthy or affluent African Americans has to still deal with profiling and that learned discrimination theoretically.
I think it's a learned discrimination, if anything, because I mean this is anecdotal, but what I've heard from multiple people is that if you get pulled over, the last thing you want is a black cop because they will be meaner to you, or they will be more aggressive with their policing. And I don't know if I can say the black cop is racist. I would say he learned a prejudice over his time working. And that's all I have to say about that. But yeah,
I think that's just assuming it's true. I personally doubt that there might be any evidence that would support or deny that claim. Assuming it's true, it kind of just has to go into the whole tribalism aspect of being a police. Once you're a police officer, you're a part of this fraternity-like system where you're with your brothers and you have to protect them. And if you're new, or I'm assuming an African-American police officer would likely have to prove himself worthy of some sort, more so than a Caucasian police officer, because of already systematic assumption that police target African Americans. So African Americans in the police force are basically a conundrum where they have to be more aggressive. They have to
pick one,
and that's only assuming if it's true. So it's still kind of just ties into the issue with police officers targeting African Americans in general, because it's from that stems African American police officers having to be more aggressive.
But that fraternity is one of the problems, right? In the sense that if the fraternity existing is what allows cops to commit crimes up to sometimes committing murder, as we've seen, and the other cops not doing anything or not ratting them out or just pretending like this doesn't happen. And I feel like that fraternity culture is one of the problems, in the sense that when you think, essentially cops are bureaucrats, right? Like they are public servants. And there is no other form of public service that I'm aware of where that level of fraternity exists. I work very briefly in the public sector. Yeah, I worked very briefly in the public sector, and people, sure, you have, you're friendly with your coworker and you don't want to see them fired or anything, but there was never a level of intimacy that would excuse violence, let alone murder of someone else, is okay. And I think if it is true that fraternity culture exists in police systems, and I agree with you that it does, it needs to be removed.
And yeah, I definitely agree. Sorry, I just wanted to quickly mention, for a lesser degree, we mentioned teachers' unions, where although being a bad teacher is nowhere a human's grievances murdering unarmed civilians. But again, like with certain unions, they're like a fraternity. They pretend to protect the bad apples per se, and taking an industry that doesn't have such a union. Let's just say like pilots. Like with pilots, you can't accept any bad apples. Like an airline can't go like, yeah, most of our pilots are great. We have a few that crash into mountains. Like that wouldn't slide. With police officers, it's generally like, hey, we might have someone who's very aggressive in arresting African Americans in particular. That's let slid. English is not my strong suit. That's let by the other members of the force. So that's definitely kind of going into the solutions category, or de-incentivizing the fraternity-like structure of police unions and police departments would definitely be like top priority, I would feel.
I have a proposal that may be garbage, but hear me out.
Wait, is this a solution?
Maybe.
If it is, try to like write it down and keep it for later, just so we don't keep jumping back and forth too much.
All right, that's cool.
All right.
Well, to be fair, it is a solution only for this fraternity thing. So I don't know if you want to hold off on that.
Well, because the fraternity thing is part of the bigger issue. Tyler, were you gonna say something?
No. You want me to say something?
I wouldn't be opposed.
All right. Well, I was gonna say we
So you
talked
were
about
gonna say
profiling.
something.
Nah, no, I was just telling him that he should probably save it for the solution. So that's all. But I was gonna say when you're talking about this goes back to when you talk about the learned profiling and biases. I believe that's something that happens before people join the police force. And I think the police force is something that kind of just amplifies these feelings that they already have and gives them the power to do things that might have already been on their mind.
I mean,
Alright,
actually, that's a really good point because I remember reading like a recent article that I guess back when we were kids, like if you could imagine, like, there were some like heroic ass kids that like I want to be a police officer one day. I want to protect people. Like the incentives to become a police officer these days is dropping, especially just after the past month. Like everyone is very aware of the problems with police officers, and maybe that would increase the incentives for malicious people who want to go ahead and join. But the people who like want justice, want to do good by the citizenry, probably de-incentivized to going into policing, maybe more towards firefighters, for example. I don't really know anyone who dislikes firefighters. I think firefighters are pretty cool. But going just back to that point, it's an issue with policing. And then I also wanted to mention really one quick thing. This issue with policing and how they handle citizens isn't just exclusive to African Americans. It's definitely pronounced towards people of color. But like one anecdotal example, if you guys saw or remember the video with Daniel Shaver, I believe that's what his name was. He was coming out of a hotel drunk. It was his room. I believe there was a call related to some sort of threat. And a drunk guy leaves his hotel room and is immediately able to get down on the ground. And after being asked a bunch of impossible tasks,
He was asked like 10 things at once. And dude didn't even give him a chance.
And he happened to be white and got riddled with multiple bullets for just leaving his hotel room and being drunk. So it's definitely like multiple anecdotal examples of police officers obviously not doing what seems to be what should be what's common sense to do, but instead acting upon fear or just general lack of proper decision making. Like there's lots of topics you can go into when it comes to issues of police.
You bring up a good point because.
Oh, my bad. Go ahead.
Briefly, you bring a good point because, in my opinion, there is two problems in the sense that there's certainly a racial bias, and I agree with Tyler that I think the bias exists before people join generally. But there's also a problem of the police being too militarized in the abstract. That is to say
Absolutely.
that yes, for sure that there's instances in which the police are killing white people, and that's not okay either. That just using that, and I'm not saying that anyone here is doing it, but people use that as an argument to justify the police force's existence. And to me, it's quite the opposite in the sense that the police force should exist solely to protect people. And whenever you hear an instance of somebody getting shot in the back by the police, I mean, listen, I don't know that much about physics, but as far as I know, you can't be, if you're shot in the back, you're running away from someone. And if you're running away from someone, you are not a threat to somebody's life. And so you'll have these instances where, yeah, sure, white people also get shot in the back by police, but none of that is okay. And on top of the police being too militarized, you have this additional racial bias that exists.
Allow me to play devil's
Wait, hold
advocate.
on. I want to make my point real quick. I was going to say, so two things. First, in response to the Shaver case, the cop who killed him actually, and this goes back to the protection that cops give themselves, is so the dude was let go. And I'm not sure if this was while he was on trial or afterwards, but They briefly rehired him so they could give him his pension before firing him again. All right, and mind you, this is after like the body footage, the body cam footage was out. This dude basically gunned down some drunk guy who was essentially begging to be listened to in a hotel hallway. He gets on trial for murder. He got acquitted for that, by the way. Instead of just getting fired, they rehire him for like a period of a week or two to give him a pension before letting him go again. And it's that type of protection that's like this is beyond corruption, right? At least you'd think they'd do something like that under the table, but the fact that they can do it so openly is just, I don't even know what to say about that. But the other thing I wanted to say, shoot, man, I forgot. Hold on, give me a second.
All right, let me.
While you're thinking, like, I just wanted to like add, also going to what Hakeem was saying. Of course, there's like exceptions. Like theoretically, let's just say there's an active shooter, and well, yeah, he'll be running away from police. Another example is the recent shooting of Rashard Brooks, a drunk man in a Wendy's drive-thru. The only threat that he was technically when he took a taser. He was no danger to society. A drunk man running is not going to get very far or anywhere quickly at all. It's, of course, like theoretically, he deserved to be arrested. He didn't deserve to get executed or murdered. So, yeah, like shooting someone in the back. And the officer that was convicted of murder was, I believe, his name was Michael Slager, where a man was running away from like a route. It was really weird why they were in like a fenced location away from his car. The police officer, of course, wanted to arrest the man, started running away, and he put like multiple shots in his back and dropped the taser next to his dead body. That footage, he was actually convicted of murder, thankfully. But usually that's just a rare situation.
The second point I was going to make is this goes back to what Hakeem was saying before you started speaking, Isaac. Or maybe it was you, I can't really remember. But in terms of cops who are losing that incentive to want to join the force, what we're seeing now, and again, I'm not sure how much of a representation this is of the average population, because this does come from Twitter, and Twitter isn't exactly the most accurate place to get news from, especially if you're looking for level-headed takes. But
Jesus, Twitter make it bad.
There's a strong push for even the quote-unquote good cops to leave the force because they're no better than the cops who commit these acts. And I guess where I want to go with this is how do you guys feel about the idea of removing the cops who are actually there trying to make a difference? Because we also have to acknowledge that a lot of these cops who actually wish to make a difference, who try to speak up and say something, they end up getting silenced and worst case scenario, fired from their jobs.
Yeah.
Right? So they do exist, but it's just the structure in place doesn't allow them to make as much change as they would want, I guess, because that's kind of the nature of unions, right? If your job is unionized, unless the entire union is with you, it's very hard for you to get anything done. So is it a good idea to essentially label every single cop a bad cop, and to those who actually want to try to make a change, tell them that you're not wanted because you're just as bad as the rest of them, so you might as well just get out of my face as well?
Obviously, that's bad.
I don't think anyone here agrees with the sentiment like ACAB. I'll just say the B is bad for just niceties, I guess. But I'd like to also open with a quote. Like I forgot who said it, but it's a quote that I like very much. Courage isn't very evenly distributed amongst the human species. In general, like when people are put situations where everything's against them, they're very likely not to succeed. Like I'd like to think that I'm brave, but if I was like a middle-aged German man in the 1930s, it's likely that I would have been a Nazi sympathizer. It's not likely that I would have been a hero. because generally courageous people are not common; they're rare, and that's why heroes deserve praise, because it's very hard to be a hero. At the very same time, the lack of support from Twitter, for example, saying like, "Oh, you shouldn't even try," is just another barrier. It's not helping the cause; it's hurting it. Where if more police officers were protected by the public, let's just say a police officer tries to end the corruption, you don't see a GoFundMe page like supporting a police officer. Like, there's nothing that a good police officer per se can do in many situations actually help the problems that he or she may see, because even if they're trying, the public isn't even on their side. All cops are a bad notion. So that's why I think it's extremely problematic.
I think I completely agree with you on that point. And I feel like you have. I mean, I frankly don't know how many, as a percentage of the cops, are problematic. I'd venture to say that it's less than 70% and more than 10, but I really don't know where it ends up there. It's a pretty big range. Because in my opinion, problematic. If you look at George Floyd, problematic is not just the one cop who had his knee on Floyd. Problematic is the 3 other cops who watched and didn't do anything, right? So I think that for every one cop who would be willing to put his knee on a guy's neck and kill him, you have 3 other cops that would be willing to watch and not do anything. And you're right that courage is not evenly distributed, and that's not really something that you can solve, and at least on the courage point of view. What you can solve is you can create a system that that encourages criticism of one's peers, that encourages employing a very, very high standard, a system which encourages healthy competition, and competition in the sense that you want to be the cop that has de-escalated the most situations. You want to be the cop that has saved the most lives, not taken the most lives.
Or well liked amongst the community.
Yeah, or the most well liked amongst the community. You want people to know your name, know who you are. You want to be friendly. I think that can exist, but that version of policing is a completely different version than the policing that exists in the United States. I think another quickly. I think another part of the problem is that there are some serious groups, serious instances of violent crime, mostly gang violence, that occur in this country. And for that reason, there needs to be some degree of the police force that is somewhat militarized, like they can't be completely unarmed, and they need to be able to act in those situations. However, I don't think that that's the sort of police force that needs to be driving in cars making traffic stops. You know what I mean? That's a completely separate. That's like this. I'm saying, like, basically SWAT teams can exist to do SWAT team things. Hostage situations, active shooters, whatever. But aside from that, there's the police is far too militarized.
I was gonna say, I believe with the Floyd case, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but I know at least one of the cops that were standing by were basically new to the force. And as far as I remember, they did try to speak up. But Officer Chauvin, I believe that's the name of the officer who had his knee on his neck, he'd been in the force for years, basically. So with his authority, he could just tell them, like, yo, shut up, like, you don't tell me what to do, basically. And in that case, I mean,
that's that fraternity mentality right there.
Yeah, like you could argue the fresh cop could have maybe tried to I don't know, pull him off or whatever, but then at that point it's like maybe in his mind he knows, if I do anything more than talk to him, like if I put my hand on this officer who's my superior, I'm never going to hear the end of it from the police union. Like his own life will basically be ruined because he tried to do the right thing. And I think this is where it kind of gets into that argument where you expect the cops to be held to a higher standard and be able to make those sacrifices. But I don't know, in that situation, I don't know if it's that easy to say, like, yeah, he should have done it. It's not that hard. When you know that,
when
the repercussions aren't going to be that nice.
Yeah, you go first, by the way.
To play devil's advocate, in like the worst neighborhoods in America, right? You sort of want that fraternity. Like, if there's like a 3-person shootout and the cops are arriving on, actually like a 3 to 10 person shootout, the cops are arriving on scene, I sort of want the guy next to me. I want to be able to trust the guy next to me with my life and not try to de-escalate that. So I feel like
All right, let me get
it's really hard to find that balance. It's really
So
hard to find. And
I was gonna.
You go, Tyler.
when you
When's the
spend
wedding?
when you spend a day in and day out with your partner or whatever, it's very likely that that fraternity is going to build up. So I don't know if there are any actionable solutions for that.
I just wanted to quickly mention that, like, camaraderie, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word wrong. English is not my strong suit. I repeat that over and over again. Like, camaraderie is probably important in a job like being a police officer. It's important in, like, being a nurse or just being a part of any sort of team where people's lives are at stake. But at the same time, the issue with fraternities that we're thinking about is, like, the stereotype based on some truths of fraternities hiding, like, cases of rape or drugging instead of actually, like,
cops do too.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, camaraderie is generally a good thing, but not dealing with misgivings or issues within your own group, just letting it slide is the main issue that we have with the fraternity aspect. Police officers.
I think the problem is, like, how would you effectively, like, balance that, if that makes sense? Like,
Like, I guess like, I don't want to go into the solutions per se, but yeah, there would be. I wanted to say something, but I also want to make sure Tyler gets his word in.
Oh no, I was gonna go off on something like random and talk about just like what do you guys think about people bringing up black on black crime to kind of discredit what's going on.
I'll actually just mention, because I also wanted to say something similar.
But
That
it's
can
like,
transition us into the responses category, into like the next section of this discussion. I feel like we've talked about the problem a good bit. Tyler, if you want to open up with that,
Before Tyler,
your little rant.
Yeah, I wanted to finish.
My bad. Thank you, though. I wanted to add in another quote from a really good song. If, like, it's always a great first time experience.
where is that the name of the song?
No. The rapper Immortal Dance with the Devil by Immortal Technique.
oh, I know.
Instant classic. But I'll just, like, summarize one of the lines, like, anyone with a gun could bust slugs. Anyone could, like, sell drugs. It takes, like, a true evil person, like, look somebody in the eye and, like, stab them to death, basically. Using the quote I said much earlier, not just courage, but, like, true evil isn't very well distributed amongst human species. When it comes to certain, like, examples of police brutality, I'll even use previous Minnesotan example with Philando Castile. So sometimes when you look at a cop's mistakes,
Hey, just so we're all clear, I don't mean to cut you, but Philando Castile was the one who had the gun license, right?
I'll elaborate. Oh yeah, he was a licensed carrier, had a license, no criminal record, was in a car with his wife and his daughter, and he was being pulled over for a broken light, I believe, or something just minor. And he tried to communicate to the police officer that he was a licensed carrier and that he had his gun. But when it comes to certain police officers, I would say that this was because of a lack of training or something similar to that nature. Ended up shooting Philando Castile out of fear. And it's easier to empathize with that kind of situation.
Why is that fear there, though?
Well, that's a completely different conversation. But where I wanted to take this is, you take that situation, at least you have some capacity for empathy there. With what Chauvin did, why it caused huge response across the entire world. is that every single person, like even some of the most alt-right, 4chan, complete like all cops are amazing type of people, look at that video and go like, wow, what the actual fuck did I just witness? It takes a lot of lack of human to snuff out somebody as they cry their life and their mom. And watching the full 10-minute videos, it's basically a live leak video. It's anyone who's seen it tends to have the same opinion. Like, what the fuck did he just do? Like, that was complete evil. Hands in the pockets. Like, of course, all cops are responsible, but Chauvin specifically did something that most humans would not be able to do with the conscious. And that's why I feel that response of America, the cause of the riots, the straw that broke the camel's back, wasn't something that we could be empathic towards. Like, it's very easy to pull a trigger, but it's very, very, very hard to purposely snuff someone's life out. So
I'm going to disagree with you.
Right.
I think the anger with Philando Castile is that, like when it came out, there was no words about like the Second Amendment, like for mostly the right, where they're just mum about the whole thing. I feel like that was the anger about it, where damn, I lost my thought.
Well, just if I can try to continue that thought for you, because I think I know where you're going. Whenever a white person's Second Amendment rights are violated, one of the strongest lobbies in the country, the NRA, goes up in arms, makes videos, and lobbies to high heaven to get whoever violated that man's Second Amendment rights punished, to get laws changed or enforced properly, etc., etc. But in Philando Castile's case, the NRA was basically mum about it, didn't do anything.
Quiet.
Which indicates that in that case, it is a purely racial issue, in the sense that what's the difference between Philando Castile and all these other people who have had their Second Amendment rights violated? He's black. That's really the only difference you can really think of. He was not improperly carrying his weapon. He was not unlicensed. He was not pointing it at the officer. He did not hide it from the officer. He did everything he did everything by the book. He did everything the way you're supposed to do it. And by the way, I think in my experience, most gun owners do everything by the book, and they're very sort of civil with their weapon, and they pay close attention not to do anything wrong with it. And Philando Castile was doing just that. He was obeying every single rule you could possibly imagine, and still he lost his life.
That's what I was kind of hitting on when I was talking about, like, why is that fear there in the first place? Take that same situation and maybe change the color of his skin. Do you think the cop would have been scared enough to shoot him?
In my opinion, not at all.
He wouldn't have been pulled over in the first place anyway. But still, I think if we're looking at something that's it's a lot larger than ourselves. We're fighting. You can see the racial injustices right in your face. And it's just it's hard to see how we're gonna be able to fight back against this. It's pretty frustrating.
I think part of what's even sadder with the Castile case is that, if I remember correctly, he had a tiny bit of weed in the car, and because of that, I think I'm not sure because this happened a while ago. I haven't checked up on it in a bit, but I think that's the reason why the NRA was like, well, because he had this in his car, he wasn't legally carrying. I don't think you're allowed to carry your gun on you if you have any sort of drugs. So they were like, yeah, because he had that weed, he technically wasn't legally carrying, so it is what it is. And
it's painful whenever the right does that. I also wanted to quickly mention that no way am I justifying the murder of Philando Castile. I was just mentioning how the difference in the American response to Philando Castile, which is extremely unfortunate. Like, I still can't find anyone who could give me a solid argument on what there was to do. Like, if there was anything Philando Castile could have done to stay alive, like, no one has a solid answer for that. That's why it's super unfortunate. It's extremely sad. But the point is that I was trying to make was that George Floyd's murder was particularly like malicious to the point where there is no justification that anyone could really have. There is the weird, like, okay, firstly, the police report that was like officially released. Apparently, he was on multiple drugs, which doesn't make sense because he was in a car. Of course, okay, like that goes into the topic of: is it possible that even forensic reports are forged? I definitely think that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like,
let's.
Dude had like multiple like methamphetamine, random.
To say about that specifically because I did research on that. So those drugs that were in his system, they were very, very, very minuscule. Like they were not enough to actually say affect his behavior. Exactly.
It's in the margin of error.
So it was they I don't know why they made it such a big deal when if you really look at it, it was pretty much essentially nothing in his system that would actually affect any behavior. I mean, we saw the videos. He was clearly not affected by any of the drugs.
The previous security footage, he was complying with other officers before Chauvin arrived. He was like sat at a curb, was moved to another curb, was complying pretty well. And for some reason, there was some sort of altercation between Chauvin and Floyd, who was already in the police car. He was somehow taken out of the police car. It's such like everything related to this case is like absolutely mind-boggling. It's why straw broke the. It's not even the straw that broke the camel's back. It's a giant boulder that fell and crushed the camel. And
well, I mean, it was everything that happened in like quick succession with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, who just got fucking. Well, he was out just running, just jogging like anybody else. And you have some citizens who decided they want to take matters into their own hands and go gun down a black guy.
I think one of the annoying things, and Hakeem, this is just a really quick point. I think one of the things that also bothers me a lot is when people try to bring up like, oh, well, why are we so mad that this person lost their life? Look at their history. They're not exactly a model citizen. And it's like, sure, but if you're doing something completely legal, there is no reason why you should lose your life. Whatever you did previously, right? Especially if you have a record, that means you did your time. And you came out. You're on the street now. The idea is that, assuming our prison system is supposed to work correctly, not saying that it does, but they want to claim it does. If it worked correctly, then the expectation is this person is now out on the street and they're reformed. They're a normal, regular citizen, just like you and I. So if they're casually walking around, there is no reason why their previous history somehow gives you an excuse or makes it less evil that they basically got killed for no reason.
I really don't even get the logic because it's not like usually the thing that I go to whenever I'm arguing with someone who's making such points is like, did he deserve an execution? Like, is that death penalty worthy? Because like most people that will make that argument are pro death penalty. If they aren't pro death penalty, then it's especially easy to break down the argument.
Even if he is pro death penalty worthy. That's why we have a system of due process. It's like arrest the guy, make him stand trial because he's innocent until proven guilty. So it's not the cop's job to decide whether he's death penalty worthy. Maybe
that isn't even worth like if someone's death penalty. Like obviously, if someone is in the middle of shooting multiple people, getting gunned down by the police is usually a good decision. I think can't think of a particular example. There was one in Maryland actually of an active shooter being shot by a police officer. That's a good thing.
How about all those active shooters that shoot up schools and get arrested?
They get nice.
Dylan Roof, like, still had his guns on him as he was casually arrested by police officers in Charleston.
That is what you call a double standard.
Yeah, it's a complete double standard. But the point I was trying to make is that even like if idea that the death penalty exists and of course innocent proven guilty, the fact of the matter is that a vast majority of these people that are being gunned down by police are not in the middle of committing such a grievous crime that their death is necessary. Like they're not such a danger to human life. It's always either in the case of Philando Castile, or training, fear, other factors, and then, in my opinion, in the case of Floyd, just pure maliciousness. It's never justified, and anyone who tries to justify it is making a weak argument.
And I think that more than that justification that people make, they sometimes try to make it for the police, like, oh yeah, the police officer was justified, whatever. And
Feared for his life.
And I don't, first of all, I don't agree with that at all. But even if you were to concede that, there's also the judicial and legal levels that need to be considered in terms of bias, in the sense that, well, on the legal level, I think by far the easiest example is the fact that weed is legal. I mean, weed is illegal and tobacco is legal, or alcohol is legal, even though weed is a much less potent drug, and much less damaging and doesn't have all the domestic violence implications of alcohol. But if you look at the judicial system, right, it's like that kid in Stanford. Well, I shouldn't say kid. I should say the man at Stanford who was on the swim team who
Brock Turner.
Yeah, Brock Turner.
Rapist
right?
Brock Turner.
He gets 3 months, I think. Right? I think it was 3 months of prison time.
A 6-month sentence. He served 2 months.
Okay, so he serves 2 months out of a 6-month sentence.
6 months.
And could you, just the fact that he got sentenced for 6 months, I mean, if
a whole ass rape.
How long if he was black, he would have been sentenced for at least 6 years. Wouldn't have been like a third of the sentence. He would have been like in behind bars for like 18 to 30.
I saw something about a black guy who got sentenced for a white woman dreaming that he raped her.
Yeah, I did see that recently, actually.
And the fact that you can like that actually is real is unbelievably sad.
And what makes it worse
Also,
is when you look at cases of exoneration, which is like when you get sentenced or something, but then they realize, oh, we were wrong, and they let you free.
30 years later.
Most of the cases of exoneration for African Americans, especially when it comes to eyewitness testimony.
Hold on, guys. I will be back. Sorry.
It's all good. But most of the cases with exoneration that have to do with eyewitness testimony are from white women wrongly accusing some black guy of having done something either to them or someone else. And, you know, that's part of what, I don't know if you guys have heard the saying of a white woman's tears are basically crocodile tears.
Yep.
It's like that's kind of where that line of thinking comes from, where their word will basically throw a black man in jail simply off their testimony.
Yeah.
And the other problem is that they know that it will throw a black man in jail, and they'll use it. I don't know if you guys saw that video.
That was that issue in New York.
Yeah,
There's no
this dude,
consequences
he's in a park, and he's essentially, the park says, I forget what the rule is, but I think is your dog.
No animals because of the birds and other wildlife.
Yeah, no animals. And he's bird watching, or he's doing bird photography. And he very politely and quietly asked this white woman to get her dog away, put him on a leash, or not let him roam around in this area because those are the rules. And the situation escalates slowly but surely, all on her part, by the way, because he's just calmly telling her what the rules are. And eventually she's like, I'm going to call the cops, and I'm paraphrasing here. I'm going to call the cops, and because I'm a white woman and I say that you threaten me, they're going to arrest you or maybe kill you or do something.
She specifically, sorry for interrupting, specifically said, I'm calling the cops and I'm going to tell them that there's a black man threatening my life.
I believe her first words were like, yeah, there's an African American man here. Like, yeah, she knows what she was doing by saying that.
That would have sent me. That would have sent me.
The man's patience is absolutely incredible. Like, he's a patron saint. Even during the interview, he's like, I forgive her. And like he was wearing a scarf, he was drinking tea. One of the most peaceful men.
Forgive her. Nah, bro. Miss me with that shit.
He remains calm in that situation. And most human beings, regardless of race, gender, anything, would have easily snapped. But
and the other thing too,
it's absolutely amazing.
The other thing too is, given the state of the police in this country, she legitimately threatened his life. Like, he didn't do anything, but by calling the police, she put his life in danger. Because They could have
Especially
come
with the
up,
words she said.
yeah, they could have come up, just assumed some shit, and just shot him
Shot.
on the spot or something like that. Like that wouldn't, if you read that headline today, you would not be like, "Oh my god, I can't believe that
If-
happened." You'd be like, "Oh, not again."
Oh,
They
fuck.
would have
Can you
covered it
imagine
up.
if he had? Can you imagine if he had binoculars in his hands? Like, hey, he had a black object in his hands. We showed
Not even
up.
by that. Just need a phone, a black phone. That's it.
Or a camera, bro, or anything.
One of the most egregious ones is Taylor Rice, the 12-year-old from, I believe it was Chicago. He was playing in his neighborhood. Somebody mistakenly thought he was a 20-year-old plus
Yeah.
man.
Oh yeah.
And then the cops GTA style drive by, shot him didn't even tell him to freeze. Just gave him 2 seconds to look and think his last thoughts before they murked him, just right out of the car, drive by shooting.
And listen, I'm not a dermatologist. I don't know anything about people's skin care, skin color, skin age. But I've never seen a 12-year-old look like a mid-20s.
Exactly.
I gotta be honest. I've never made that mistake in my life.
If I take off my glasses, maybe.
When you were 12,
If I take off my glasses, and they're
bro,
like
I know what,
a
when
football
you were
field
12,
away. Yeah.
you did look 25. I'm sorry, you would not have walked into a bar, 12-year-old Tramiel, get served without being cart. It's just not gonna happen.
What do you guys think about the idea of people who make false reports? Not, of course, being punished the same. I see some arguments people who falsely accuse of rape should get the 30 years that rape deserves. I don't think that. I think that's obviously too extreme. But when it comes to false police reports or purposely dangerous police reports, I feel like there definitely should be some sort of punishment. Not a boy who cried wolf style, as in, oh, you can never call the police again, because obviously people could be in danger regardless of how stupidly they call a police officer for. But I mean, there should be some sort of monetary fine. Because if DC can give me $100 ticket for going 5 over the speed limit, then they can definitely give Karens $100 tickets for wasting police resources.
Just
Yeah,
like
$100
firefighters.
is minimum. Whew, that's a low punishment for that sort of thing. I mean, I think
just
that
like
there should be an
firefighters
initial
will.
punishment. Go ahead, Yvonne, sir.
Just like if you pull a fire alarm too many times and there's no actual fire, they start, at least the firefighters. I know in apartment buildings, for example, they'll be nice about it the first few times, but after a certain point, they'll let you know, you keep doing this and we don't care. We'll fine you if there's no fire, right? So, and with cops, where it's if you call 911, that's because there's a legitimate emergency. Not only are you wasting resources, but I mean, you're taking away a cop who could potentially be more used somewhere else. That's not even that. You're in the case with that woman in New York, depending on how you make the call, you're potentially putting someone else's life in danger. Because a lot of the times, and this is more so true for women, but if you happen to be a woman and you call the cops and you claim that because domestic abuse is one of the calls that usually go wrong the quickest, just looking at the data. Yes, so it's very easy that you could make that call and the officer comes in and then you start, you start acting or whatever, and then the guy, he's on his nerves as well, so he does something stupid even though he didn't mean to, ends up losing his life there when really there was nothing, but you created a scene as soon as the cops showed up. It's to have those people be able to just walk away free from something like that.
It's obligatory one to mention. You're obviously not mentioning or discouraging the idea that people in domestic violence situations didn't call the cops. We're talking specifically about
definitely not.
The meme Karen situations.
But for the people who know the power they have for the system and abuse it, that's what we're talking about right now.
They're experiencing an extremely minor inconvenience and go out of their way to use their supposed powers of calling the police to get their way, like spoiled little children throwing temper tantrums. At least that's the way I see it. My bias is probably obvious in that. there's nothing much else to say there.
This is completely irrelevant, but I always find it cute. You guys ever see those like little news clips of some kid calling the cops because he's like he needs help on his homework or whatever, or just stuff like that? I don't know. I think it's cute. I just want to put that out there.
I mean, yeah, like
but that's funny because that's a great example of the racial bias. I've heard of that happening, but I've never heard of a black kid doing it. Probably because any black kid that tried to do that is dead.
You had to ruin my image of it. Oh,
Oh,
God.
God.
All right. Okay.
I thought you were gonna go a lot lighter.
Look,
we get your point. We get your point.
Yeah, and I think that I was just trying to, well, just to bring it a little bit back more on topic.
Yeah.
The if we're gonna talk about like the response thing, and not just the response to Floyd, but the response to like the police killings in general, I think that one of the positive things of the response is that people have been, first of all, the response has been biracial in the sense that people have been going out. White and black people and Latinos and Asians, a lot of people have been out protesting. But also when you see like that Buffalo man who got pushed down, right? And by the two officers, they cracked his skull open. As far as
that was
Was he
think
the
he's, like,
75-year-old?
partially yeah, he was a
Yeah.
75-year-old.
Yeah.
So when that happened, I'm glad that there was focus on that, and it wasn't just okay. He's not black. We're not going to focus on on police abusing him, because I think he's a great example of how the police is just way too aggressive and way too militarized in general. In the sense that why are the police marching down the street like they're a battalion in Iraq, and they gotta stamp out every sign of life that passes by him? It's like, this is an old guy. He's not harmless. I think that I'm not saying he was doing anything wrong that he needed to be arrested for. But if the cops just calmly and quietly arrested him and took him away, I don't think anyone really would have complained. I think that part of the issue is that the cops always escalate a situation. There was another video I saw in Alabama where this guy, black guy, he owns a liquor store. And he calls to report a robbery at the liquor store, his own liquor store. So like three cops come in, and he's there yelling at them, but he's not yelling at them per se. He's just yelling because his store just got robbed. So he's like, some guy just walked out, whatever. He's trying to explain to the cops the situation, and immediately they punch him and start hitting him, and they arrest him because they assume that he's the guy who's robbing the liquor store.
I hope he got a fat check from
Yeah, I saw that.
He better.
Indeed. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for reaching the end of part 1 of our discussion on American policing. If you wish to hear the rest of this discussion, please click the link in the description below, which will take you to part 2, in which we cover the responses we have seen to the current protests. We hope you've enjoyed so far, and we hope you'll follow us through to the end. Thank you.